We're going to logically continue from the previous activity. We're going to use the honeypot features of KF Sensor, and we're going to analyze our scans of it. We're going to test it a little bit. So just make sure that Kali and Server 2016 are running and that KF Sensor is running on Server 2016. We're going to, just for good measure, make sure that the KF Sensor log is clear, that all the events are hidden. We'll restart the service so we start fresh. We'll configure KF Sensor to listen with honeypot ports on additional ports that Server 2016 is not truly listening on. We'll just do a default scan against it, and we'll look for logical inconsistencies that are kind of a clue that this is a honeypot. Here I am on Server 2016. I have some leftover artifacts from the previous activity. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to view. I'm going to hide events, hide all, make sure they're all gone. I'm going to come over into File Explorer on the C drive, KF Sensor logs, and I'm going to select, I'm just going to click and drag to highlight all of these and delete them. And I'm going to restart the KF Sensor service so we start out fresh. Restart the server. I went File, Services, and then Restart Server. I want to start out with nothing interfering. We're brand new here now. Let me see if there are any logs here. I'm just going to get rid of existing logs. It'll create brand new ones as activity happens. Let's go over to Kali, and what we're going to do with Kali is we're going to perform a default scan. Let me just clear, and I just want to talk about what happens. I'm going to type nmap and then the IP of Server 2016, in my case 192.168.75.16, hit enter. And nmap shows a number of things that are open. And when I look here, what strikes me when I first look is I see ports that don't even make sense in today's day and age that nmap reports as being open. Like port 1, nobody has port 1 running. And who has port 7, the old echo port? You know, you send a string and it sends back the same thing. Or 9 or 13. These are the simple TCP services, or quote of the day or character generator. I mean, nobody runs these anymore. To show that they're open, to me, is highly suspicious. And then when I look, I see FTP is open. Okay. Most operating systems, you can install an FTP service. SSH, there's no native program in Windows that runs an SSH server. You'd have to set up PuTTY or something like that. Telnet, you can, in Server 2016, you can set up the Telnet service if you want. Not typical. SMTP, I do expect, but TCP42 name server, Windows doesn't use that. No way. TCP53, that is a DNS server. TCP53 is the port that's used when DNS servers replicate to each other, what we call a zone transfer. TCP port 80, yeah, it could be a web server, but 81, 82, I'm really suspicious of that. 83? No. POP? Probably. But this one, no Windows server ever runs TCP 111. That is the Unix equivalent to TCP 135. That's for remote procedure call. You don't have that in Windows. This is what I expect in Linux or Unix. Here is the equivalent in Windows. I don't expect them both to run on the same thing. To me, that's a humongous red flag that this is a honeypot. And NNTP, well, you could be running the network news protocol, but not likely. Ident, Windows isn't running this. Now, I don't know for a fact that this is Windows, but 135 is a purely Windows port. Nobody else runs 135 except for Windows. You could have Linux and Unix running the Samba service 139. You could be running some kind of email server. You could be running HTTPS, of course. 445, if you were Linux or Unix also running Samba, you would not only run 139, but 445. You could be, as an email server, running 587. But there are just too many things that are anomalies. Now, come on. TCP 2000, Cisco, SCCP. No, you know, there are too many logical inconsistencies here as I look through all of this. These just don't make sense that one device would be running these. Semantic AV, well, maybe, but I don't buy it. Too many inconsistencies. And every single port open? No way. Especially if this thing was on the internet. There's not a chance. There's no chance, unless this thing is a honeypot, that it's going to be running all these different things. Every single port is open. I don't think so. And when I go back up here to the beginning, so it shows all these ports open. Yes, some ports are closed. I just don't buy it. Now, full disclosure, and we're running this white box mode, I come over here on the honeypot side and I click close TCP ports. And these are ports that we were trying to scan that were closed. But port 1, come on now, you know, and port 2, I mean, they're just, I don't expect to see these kinds of things. Let me refresh my view here. So I just don't expect to see these. So I'm really highly suspicious. Now, if you want to configure your honeypot, what you can do with this particular tool, KF Sensor, is you can go to what's called scenario. Now, scenario is just sort of the general configuration based on what you want this thing to do. You can edit scenarios, edit scenarios. It by default uses a main scenario. You can click edit to edit that. And you can add some TCP ports if you like. So we can click add, and we want to add maybe TCP port. Let's see, we've got port 1, 2. We could add port 3, 4, 5 if we wanted to. Name port 3, call it whatever we like. It's a TCP port, it's TCP port 3. Let it listen on whatever addresses you want, all of them if you want. You can have the honeypot pretend to the scanner what it is. We could just say, oh, this is a let's simulate a banner of some kind with some level of severity. And it's trying right now to change this. If it tries to change this, just change it back. Port 3, TCP port 3. Okay, we click OK. And, class name, virus class name. This is, a Trojan and a worm. And click OK. And click OK. And click OK. And in a moment, it'll show that there's our port 3. So now the honeypot is listening on that as well. And if we go over to Nmap on Kali, and if we just scan that one port, let's just go to Nmap TAC P for port 3, target 192.168.75.16. Press enter. And it shows, and we can see port 3 did indeed have an event. Shows, this is open. Port 3 is open. Now that is like so suspicious. Nobody is going to run that unless they're a honeypot. And we can see now on KF Sensor, yep, sure enough, when we double click it, sure enough, Nmap scanned this port. Okay, so when you are scanning and you see logical contradictions, like what we see here in Kali, I'm going to go back, when they're all open and you've got ports that just are a mix of Linux and Microsoft and they just don't go together, or you see loads of ports that you just don't expect that particular service to be running on that host, these are all indicators that this is a honeypot and not the real thing. Now, if you want to have a little bit of fun, you can go out on the internet. You can go to showdan.io. And showdan.io, if you go to honeyscore.showdan.io, it has a tester to see, is this thing a honeypot or not? And you put in an IP address to check whether or not this thing is a honeypot or a real system. And you can check for honeypot. There are other honeypot testers as well. So that's how we test and analyze for honeypots.